President Biden said last year's Inflation Reduction Act represented the largest investment in clean energy and American manufacturing in history. It's easy to dismiss such rhetoric as political bluster, but his predictions about the IRA may actually come true. Companies have announced billions of dollars of investment in factories for solar panels, wind turbines, batteries. The batteries made in those plants could power as many as 13 million electric vehicles per year. I wanted to talk about it with Bill Ford, executive chair of the Ford Motor Company and the great-grandson of the company's founder, Henry Ford. The elder Ford, of course, changed American manufacturing forever over a century ago by literally inventing the assembly line. Bill Ford, pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you, Fareed. It's great to be here.
So let me ask you, a lot of people are looking at Joe Biden's IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which really is a series of tax credits, subsidies, incentives for a transition to a green economy. And they say this is going to be mammoth. This is going to be one of these sea changes in America, in American industry. And at the tip of the spear is the electric vehicle revolution. So for you, looking at it from your vantage point, what does it look like, and is that kind of characterization accurate?
I mean, yeah, it's a big change, but we need it. We need to. The rest of the world is moving faster than we are. China has moved at light speed towards electrification, and Europe has moved much faster than we have. So it's inevitable. It's coming, and frankly, it should come. But the important thing, though, and this is where the IRA really is very helpful, is to help establish a manufacturing base in America. Right now the technology largely is outside of America, and a lot of it's being imported. But we feel it's really important, and I think the administration does as well, to build an American supply base as we transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles.
But talk to me about that local supply base, because you've gotten into a little trouble with some senators like Marco Rubio because you're building a battery facility in Michigan. But in order to do it, and in order to use the most cutting-edge technology, you're partnering with a Chinese company. So, I mean, inevitably there is going to have to be some of this kind of partnering. Right?
No question. And first of all, it's a wholly owned Ford facility. There'll be our employees, and all we're doing is licensing the technology. That's it. And actually, it's exactly what the IRA was set up to do, because we're localizing production in America. Our engineers will be working with that technology, integrating it into our vehicles. So we will learn that technology. We'll understand how, in this case, CATL not only makes the batteries, but also prepares them to be integrated into the vehicle. That's really important, that our engineers gain that knowledge so we can eventually do it ourselves.
When you hear people talk about the Build in America part of it, there are many people, economists, who criticize it, saying, look, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to massively raise costs. If everything has to be manufactured in America, you're not taking advantage of global supply chains, global manufacturing, the fact that you can source things from all over the world in order to make something. The famous example is often given that if the iPhone was made in America, everything was made in America, it would cost 4 times as much, I think is the estimate, as it does now. What do you say to that?
I say making things in America matters. And if we outsource it all, we're not going to have a strong economy. That's for sure. The other thing is the multiplier effect of a manufacturing job is much greater than any other part of the economy. Other countries know this, and that's why they're so anxious to get the auto jobs in their countries.
But when you look at this cost issue, is this part of what's going on with the EVs, with the electric vehicles? Because you lose money.
Well, sure we do.
Even though you're making a lot, on each car you lose money.
We do, now. But it's like all new technology. Once you start to come down the cost curve, and you start climbing up the production curve, the costs will come down. And they're coming down, even as we're sitting here. And with each generation, they'll get better and better, and the batteries will get smaller and smaller and more efficient. And so you could look at almost any other industry that's adopted new technology. The early days typically were loss leaders, and things were expensive. But once the technology ramped up, costs started to come down quite dramatically, and we see that happening here too.
When you look out at the future of the American economy right now, with all this transition taking place, with the infrastructure bill, which is the largest in at least 20, 25 years, how do you feel about the American economy?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot we can be happy with, and but we have, I think, too much debt as a country. Yes, we just raised the debt ceiling, but that's kind of kicking the can down the road. And I think and China owns a lot of our debt, which is worrisome, I think, from a national security standpoint. But I think a lot of good things also have been done. Now, are we headed into a recession? I don't know. My crystal ball is pretty cloudy on that one.
Next up, how does Ford plan to keep up with the stiff competition in electric vehicles everywhere from the United States to China? I'll ask him about it when we come back. Gas-guzzling vehicles and are now trying to pivot to electric. How is that transition working out at Ford? More of my interview with Bill Ford, Executive Chair of the Ford Motor Company. How difficult is it to change the culture of your whole manufacturing process, which has really been an industrial process, whereas an electric car is basically software on wheels.
Right.
Tesla does seem to have an advantage in that it's a technology company that happens to make cars, whereas you're a car company that is trying to move up the technology value chain.
Yeah, and there's actually merit to both. I mean, I think Tesla has found that making the car part isn't as much fun as maybe they thought it was. It's difficult. And you're right, we're trying to catch them now on the technology side. But I think, one of the things for sure is that not everybody is ready for EVs. And that's fine. We have a whole incredibly attractive portfolio of internal combustion. And we're going to have those vehicles for quite some time, because one of the questions I'm frequently asked is, well, how quickly is this going to happen? And what is the adoption rate? The short answer is we don't really know. So we have a wonderful portfolio of vehicles, which, by the way, we're continuing to invest in. I was in Kentucky last week where we just launched our new Super Duty, which is the backbone of work in America, and that's an internal combustion vehicle. That vehicle doesn't lend itself today to electrification. Now, as batteries get bigger, stronger, and more energy dense, will it someday? Yes, probably, but we're not there yet. So I think for some segments, yes, gasoline will still be needed. So it's important that we have a mix of vehicles, and if this thing all breaks much faster than what I just described, we'll be ready.
If EV adoption moves faster than people expect, or even at the same pace, there are many concerns about the supply chain there. Mm-hmm. Do we actually have the capacity to get as much lithium, as much copper, as much of all those rare earths that you need to make these computers on wheels?
One of the nice things about battery is they are almost infinitely recyclable. So once we get the initial sort of big group out there, there's going to be a whole industry around recycling the battery, because all those elements you just mentioned can be reused and reused and reused. So it's not as if we're going to have to be mining these forever. We're going to have to mine them until we get kind of a critical mass out there, and then we'll just recycle the heck out of them.
And do you think are there any dangers in terms of the supply chain? People worry about our access to minerals. A lot of them are in African countries. In many of those cases, the countries have signed almost exclusive deals with China. Some of those things are in China itself. Do you foresee any problems in getting access to all this stuff?
Look, the supply base, whether it's on the internal combustion engine or on the EV level, there are issues all through the supply base globally. COVID really knocked the supply base on its tail, and we're still recovering from that, whether it's chips, whether it's something very prosaic that we never thought we'd have a problem with, all of a sudden we do. But on the mineral side, you're right. Some of them are tougher to get than others, but they keep finding new sources too. And there are new sources in this country. The Salton Sea out in the desert in California, turns out that's got quite a bit of lithium that's ready to be mined. But yeah, it is an issue, and of course then there's the human rights issue on the mining as well. We are trying to be very, very careful and mindful about the suppliers that we do business with. But some of it is, it's hard to have great vision into some of the sub-supplier, but we're trying to, because again, we don't want to do business like that, and we won't.
The world's biggest exporter of cars today is China.
Yep.
Really remarkable. It's gone from essentially having no industry 15 years ago to be doing better than Japan this year. The next big phase of electric vehicles, I assume, will be Chinese EVs because they had huge numbers there.
Yes.
Are you ready to compete with Chinese EVs in America?
Probably not quite yet. We need to get ready, and we are getting ready. But you're right. I mean, they're already going to Europe, and they're growing very fast in Europe. They are, and you mentioned the speed at which they developed. They developed very quickly. They developed them in large scale, and now they're exporting them. And they're not here, but they'll come here, we think, at some point. And we need to be ready, and we're getting ready. So, I mean, we have an all hands on deck. We learned a lot. When I look back at when the Japanese came to America, we weren't ready. Then the Koreans came, and we really weren't ready. Well, guess what? It's going to happen again, and we are going to be ready this time because we're acutely aware of what not being ready will do to us.
Bill Ford, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Fareed.
Next on GPS, as the Supreme Court issues landmark end-of-term decisions, we'll ask an important question. Is the court today acting as a defender of democracy or as a threat to it? When we get back.